The night she disappeared didn't begin with sirens or screams. It began quietly, almost invisibly, like any other evening. The streetlights flickered on one by one. Cars passed by without slowing down. People closed their doors, locked their windows, and carried on with their lives. But somewhere in the middle of that ordinary night, a girl made a decision that would erase her from the world everyone knew. She didn't leave behind a note. She didn't tell anyone goodbye, and most importantly, she didn't look back. Because that girl knew something that was never meant for her to see. Something that turned every familiar face into a question mark, and every safe place into a trap. The truth has a strange way of doing that. It changes everything. It peels back the comfortable lies people hide behind, and exposes the things they pray will stay buried forever. At first, the changes in her behavior were subtle. Friends noticed she had become quieter. Conversations that once made her laugh now made her uneasy. She would pause before answering simple questions, as if weighing every word carefully. It was the kind of shift people dismiss at first. Stress, a bad day, maybe she just needed space. But the truth was far more complicated. Somewhere along the way, she had stumbled onto something she wasn't supposed to know. It could have been a secret conversation overheard at the wrong time, a message meant for someone else, a discovery hidden in plain sight. Whatever it was, the moment she understood it, the world she thought she lived in shattered completely. Imagine realizing that the people you trusted most might not be who they claimed to be. Imagine knowing that the places you felt safest might actually be the most dangerous. That kind of knowledge doesn't just sit quietly in your mind. It grows. It whispers questions late at night. It forces you to replay every memory, every moment, every interaction, until the truth becomes impossible to ignore. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The girl tried to act normal at first. That's what most people do when they discover something terrifying. They pretend everything is fine. They tell themselves they're overthinking. They convince themselves that maybe, just maybe, they misunderstood what they saw. But deep down, she knew. The signs were everywhere. The strange looks. The awkward silences when she walked into a room. The feeling that conversation suddenly stopped the moment she appeared. The sense that someone somewhere was watching her just a little too closely. Fear has a way of creeping in slowly like that. Not as a loud alarm, but as a quiet instinct that tells you something is wrong, very wrong. And eventually, that instinct becomes impossible to ignore. So she started preparing in ways no one noticed. Small things at first. She spent more time alone. She stopped sharing personal details. She became careful with where she went and who she trusted. It was almost like she was slowly detaching herself from the life she once had, piece by piece, moment by moment, until finally the night arrived. The night when staying became more dangerous than leaving. No dramatic confrontation happened. No public scene, just a silent decision made in the darkness when the world was asleep and no one was paying attention. She stepped away from everything she had ever known, from the streets she grew up on, from the people who believed they understood her, from the life that had quietly turned into something far more threatening than she ever imagined. Because sometimes the truth isn't something you fight. Sometimes the only way to survive it is to disappear. The night she disappeared didn't begin with sirens or screams. It began quietly, almost invisibly like any other evening. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across empty sidewalks. Cars rolled past without slowing down, their headlights sweeping briefly over houses that looked peaceful from the outside. People finished their dinners, turned on their televisions, and settled into routines they had followed 1,000 times before. Nothing about that night seemed unusual. Nothing about it suggested that somewhere in that calm, a life was about to change forever. Inside that stillness, A girl was thinking, not about ordinary things like what tomorrow might bring or what plans she might make for the weekend. Her mind was somewhere far heavier, circling a truth she wished she had never discovered, a truth that had slowly crept into her life and refused to leave. At first it had seemed small, almost meaningless, just a detail that didn't make sense. A moment that didn't quite fit with everything else she believed about the people around her. Most people ignore those moments. They brush them aside and tell themselves it's nothing. But she didn't. The more she thought about it, the more it bothered her. One small inconsistency led to another. One strange detail connected to a second. Then a third. Soon the puzzle pieces began forming a picture she never expected to see. It wasn't the kind of realization that arrives all at once. It unfolded slowly, the way darkness spreads across the sky after sunset. At first, it was only a feeling, a quiet discomfort she couldn't explain. Then it became a suspicion. Something wasn't right. Something wasn't adding up. Every day after that, she noticed things she had never noticed before. The way certain people exchanged glances when they thought she wasn't looking. The way conversations changed when she walked into a room. The subtle tension that seemed to appear out of nowhere whenever certain topics were mentioned. Most people would have convinced themselves they were imagining it, but she kept watching. She kept listening. And eventually, the truth showed itself in a way that could no longer be ignored. The kind of truth that rearranges your entire understanding of the world around you. The kind that makes you question whether the life you've been living was ever real at all. In a single moment of clarity, everything familiar suddenly felt strange. The places she once felt safe now carried a different energy. The voices she once trusted now sounded uncertain. Even the silence around her felt heavier, like it was hiding something. Living with that kind of knowledge is exhausting. It sits quietly in the back of your mind during every conversation. It lingers behind every smile and every casual interaction. It forces you to watch people more carefully, to listen more closely, to notice the things others overlook. And that is exactly what she started doing. She became quieter. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she was observing more than she was speaking. She began paying attention to patterns, who showed up where, who avoided certain questions, who seemed nervous when certain subjects came up. The answers didn't appear immediately, but slowly, piece by piece, the picture became clearer, and with that clarity came fear. Not the loud, dramatic kind of fear that sends people running. This was a slower, colder realization. The kind that settles deep in your chest when you understand that knowing the truth might put you in danger. She started to feel it everywhere. In the pauses between conversations. In the way someone's tone shifted when they spoke to her. In the uncomfortable feeling that eyes might be following her even when she couldn't see them. It wasn't a paranoia. It was awareness. Because once someone knows something they were never supposed to know, the world around them begins to feel different. Every sound seems louder. Every shadow seems darker. Every small detail begins to carry meaning. And somewhere deep down, she understood one terrifying possibility. If the wrong person realized what she knew, staying where she was might not be safe anymore. She didn't leave behind a note. No explanation written on paper. No message typed late at night and sent to someone she trusted. When people vanish, the first thing investigators usually look for is a goodbye, some trace of emotion left behind in words. But in her case, there was nothing like that. No folded letter on a desk. No scribbled message in a notebook. Just an empty space where her presence used to be. To the outside world, that silence felt confusing. Friends searched through their phones expecting to find a final text. Something emotional. Something dramatic. Maybe a confession of fear or a desperate plea for help. But the messages stopped exactly where normal conversations should have continued. casual replies, short answers, ordinary exchanges about everyday things. It looked completely normal. And that's what made it so strange. People who decide to leave forever often want to explain themselves. They want someone to understand why they made that choice. Even a few simple words can give meaning to a disappearance. But she chose something different. She left without leaving anything behind to explain her thoughts, her fears, or the reason she walked away from everything. Because explaining the truth would have meant putting it into words, and putting it into words might have made it dangerous. Sometimes silence is the safest option when the truth involves people, when Ho should never know how much you've discovered. Writing things down can create evidence. Evidence can be found, and once it's found, it can lead directly back to the person who wrote it. She understood that. Every detail mattered now. Every small action could either protect her or expose her. So she erased the possibility of leaving clues behind. No written goodbye meant no trail. No emotional confession meant no record of what she knew or what she feared. Anyone looking for answers would only find empty space where explanations should have been. But there was something else she didn't do. She didn't tell anyone goodbye. Not her closest friends. Not the people who believed they knew her best. And not the ones who would have begged her to stay. That silence might seem cold to people who only see the surface of the story. It might look like she disappeared without caring about the people in her life. But sometimes saying goodbye is the most dangerous thing someone can do. Goodbyes invite questions. Questions invite curiosity. Curiosity leads people to start searching for answers. And answers can expose truths that are meant to stay hidden. If she had confided in someone, even just one person, it could have changed everything. That person might have tried to stop her. They might have shared the conversation with someone else. They might have unknowingly passed along information that reached the wrong ears. Secrets rarely stay contained once more than one person knows them. She knew that better than anyone. So she carried the weight of the truth alone. Imagine the pressure of that decision, knowing that the people you care about will wake up one day confused and worried. Knowing they will search for explanations and wonder what went wrong, yet still choosing silence because protecting them means keeping them in the dark. Every hour before she left Muz, T have felt heavier than the last. Conversations with friends would have sounded different, knowing they were among the final ones. Familiar places would have looked different, knowing she might never see them again. And yet, she said nothing. No emotional goodbye, no warning. No hint that anything in her life was about to change. From the outside, everything looked exactly the same as it always had, but inside her mind, a quiet decision had already been made. A decision that required complete control. The kind of control that only comes when someone understands the stakes of what they know. So she moved carefully through those final hours, speaking normally, acting normally, giving no one a reason to suspect that the person they were talking to was already preparing to disappear from their lives completely. Because once someone knows the truth about the wrong people, even a simple goodbye can become a risk they cannot afford to take. And most importantly, she didn't look back. Not at the house where she had spent so many ordinary days. Not at the streets that once felt familiar and safe. Not at the life that had quietly surrounded her for years. When someone walks away from everything they know, the instinct to look back is almost impossible to resist. Memories pull at you. Doubt whispers questions. Part of the mind keeps asking whether leaving is truly the right choice. But she understood something most people never have to face. Looking back can make you hesitate. Hesitation can slow you down. And slowing down can give danger the chance to catch up. So when she stepped away, she forced herself to keep moving forward. Each step carried the weight of every decision she had made leading up to that moment. It wasn't the kind of departure filled with dramatic emotions or visible panic. It was quieter than that. Controlled, careful, the kind of movement someone makes when they know that every second matters. The world around her continued exactly as it always had. Streetlights hummed softly. Distant cars passed along the road. Windows glowed warmly in the houses she walked past. To anyone watching from a distance, it would have looked like an ordinary night and an ordinary person simply heading somewhere else. But inside her mind, every sound felt louder. Every shadow seemed deeper. Every small movement in the distance demanded attention. When a person carries knowledge that could put them in danger, the world begins to feel different. Familiar surroundings turn into a map of possible threats. Every corner becomes something to scan. Every passing figure becomes someone to observe carefully. She had thought about this moment many times before it actually arrived. In the quiet hours when sleep refused to come, her mind had replayed different possibilities. What she would take, what she would leave behind, which paths were safest, which places she needed to avoid. Preparation doesn't always look obvious from the outside. Sometimes it happens entirely inside someone's thoughts long before their body ever moves. By the time she finally walked away, the decision had already been made again and again in her mind. There was no space left for doubt. Still, memories have a way of creeping in during moments like that. As she moved farther away from the life she had known, images must have surfaced without warning. Familiar faces, laughter shared in ordinary moments, conversations that once felt simple and safe before the truth complicated everything. Those memories could have pulled her back. They could have made her pause. They could have tempted her to turn around just once, to take one last look at the place she once belonged. But she resisted that urge completely. Because looking back isn't just about seeing what you. Because looking back isn't just about seeing what you are leaving behind. It's also about reopening the door to emotions that might weaken your resolve. The moment someone begins to question their choice even slightly, the path forward becomes harder to follow. She couldn't allow that. The truth she carried had already changed too much. It had reshaped the way she saw the people around her, the way she understood certain events, the way she interpreted quiet moments that once seemed harmless. Once knowledge reaches that level, returning to normal life becomes impossible. Pretending not to know would require trusting people she no longer trusted. Staying would mean living in constant fear of what might happen if someone realized she understood the truth. So she focused only on what lay ahead. The darkness in front of her might have been uncertain, but at least it offered distance. Distance from questions. Distance from suspicion. Distance from the quiet tension that had begun to fill her days after the truth revealed itself. Step by step, she increased that distance. Each passing minute carried her farther from the life she once recognized. Each quiet street placed another layer between her and the place where everything had started to feel wrong. And the entire time she kept her eyes forward, refusing to give the past even a single glance, because that girl knew something. Something that didn't belong in the open. Something that lived quietly beneath ordinary conversations and everyday routines. The kind of truth that hides in plain sight, waiting for the wrong person to notice it. For most people, life moves forward without ever encountering secrets like that. They wake up, go about their day, trust the people around them, and never imagine that hidden stories might exist just beneath the surface. But she had crossed that invisible line. The moment she understood what she had discovered, everything began to change. At first it didn't feel like a dramatic revelation. It was more like a quiet realization, forming slowly in the back of her mind. A detail that didn't match the explanation she had been given. A moment that didn't align with the story everyone else seemed comfortable believing. Most people would have dismissed it. They would have told themselves it was nothing. But she paid attention. That one detail led her to notice another. Then another. Small fragments that didn't seem connected at first started forming a pattern that was impossible to ignore. The kind of pattern that only becomes visible once someone stops accepting things at face value. And once she saw it, she couldn't stop seeing it. Every memory began to look different. Conversations she once considered harmless started to carry a different meaning. Words that sounded normal at the time now echoed in her mind, with a strange weight behind them. It felt like discovering a hidden message inside a story she had already read 100 times. The characters were the same, the setting was the same, but the meaning had completely changed. She began replaying moments from the past, searching for clues she might have missed earlier. Sometimes it was a sentence someone had spoken too quickly. Sometimes it was a look exchanged between two people when they thought no one was watching. Sometimes it was a silence that lasted just a little too long after a question had been asked. Those small details started connecting in ways that made her uneasy. The truth wasn't just surprising, it was dangerous. Dangerous because of who it involved. Dangerous because of what it revealed. And dangerous because she was never supposed to understand it. There are certain truths that exist quietly because everyone involved assumes they will remain hidden forever. The people connected to those truths rely on silence. They rely on the belief that no one will ever notice the cracks in the story. But once someone does notice, everything becomes fragile. The secret is no longer safe, and the person who discovered it becomes a problem. That realization slowly began settling into her thoughts. At first she tried to convince herself she might be wrong. Maybe she misunderstood something. Maybe there was an explanation she hadn't considered yet. But the more she thought about it, the clearer everything became. Every piece of the puzzle fit too perfectly. The story everyone else believed started to feel like a carefully arranged illusion, something designed to look simple on the outside, while hiding something far more complicated underneath. The scariest part wasn't just knowing the truth. It was realizing that the people connected to it had likely spent a long time protecting it. Protecting secrets requires effort. It requires trust between the people who share it. It requires careful control over what others see and hear, which meant one terrifying possibility began forming in her mind. If she could notice the truth, someone else might eventually realize that she had noticed it, and that's when the situation could become dangerous, because secrets that powerful are rarely protected with kindness. Something that was never meant for her to see. It was never meant for her to see. It was never meant for her to see. It was never net beyond. It existed right there within the ordinary rhythm of daily life, disguised so well that most people would have walked past it without ever noticing. The truth often hides like that, blending into normal routines, wearing the face of something harmless. But on one quiet moment, her eyes lingered where others would have looked away. At first it might have seemed like nothing more than a coincidence, a strange detail appearing at the wrong time. Something it didn't quite match the explanation she had been given. These kinds of moments happen all the time, and most people dismiss them instantly. They trust the version of reality that feels easier to accept. She tried to do the same. For a while, she convinced herself she was overthinking. Maybe she misunderstood what she saw. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation waiting somewhere she simply hadn't found yet. Life moves much more comfortably when questions are ignored rather than explored. But curiosity has its own momentum. Once a single doubt appears in the mind, it begins searching for answers automatically. It turns ordinary moments into opportunities to observe more carefully. It transforms casual conversations into puzzles waiting to be solved. Without even realizing it at first, she began paying attention to the small things. How certain people reacted when specific names were mentioned. How quickly some subjects were changed the moment they came up. How certain details in different stories never seemed to match perfectly. These were the kinds of clues that most people overlook because they appear too small to matter. But when enough small inconsistencies gather together, they stop looking like accidents. They start looking like something intentional. The realization didn't arrive suddenly. It grew slowly, almost quietly, inside her thoughts. Each new observation strengthened the uncomfortable feeling that something important was being hidden. The world she thought she understood began to shift slightly out of alignment. What once seemed simple now felt layered with meanings she hadn't recognized before. Familiar situations started carrying a strange tension beneath the surface, as if invisible threads connected people and events in ways no one openly discussed. And then there was the moment when everything finally clicked. Not a loud, dramatic discovery, but a quiet instant of clarity. The kind of moment when separate pieces of information suddenly locked together and revealed the full picture. In that moment, the truth became impossible to ignore. It explained the strange behavior she had noticed. It explained the inconsistencies in the stories she had heard. It explained the uncomfortable feeling that had been growing inside her for days, maybe even weeks. But understanding it didn't bring relief. It brought fear, because the truth wasn't just surprising. It was the kind of knowledge that made her question whether she should have ever discovered it in the first place. Some secrets exist quietly for years, because everyone involved believes they are safe from exposure. The people protecting them rely on silence, on trust, and on the assumption that no one will ever connect the dots. But now someone had, and that someone was her. The weight of that realization settled heavily in her mind. Knowing the truth meant she was no longer just an ordinary observer moving through daily life. She had become something else entirely, a witness, someone who had seen what was never supposed to be seen, someone who understood what others had worked so carefully to hide. From that moment forward, every interaction carried a different meaning. Every conversation felt slightly more dangerous. Every casual glance from someone around her raised new questions. Because once a secret like that is discovered, one unsettling thought begins repeating itself over and over in the back of the mind. What happens if the wrong people realize you know it too?